Hi everyone, welcome to the Coding Zoo. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Shane and this is the CSS Building Blocks video series. So this is the first lesson in the CSS Building Block series. In today's lesson, we are going to go over the 3 different ways you can apply styles to an HTML document. So if you're ready to go, let's jump in. In our introduction video to this series, we created this Coding Zoo CSS folder that we're going to use as a template, and in each lesson you would copy that folder to create a new lesson folder, and that way each example we do, you have a copy of it so you can go back and refer to it later. So I'm going to go to my desktop here, I'm going to find that folder, and I'm going to right click and choose copy, and then I'm going to right click on my desktop and choose paste. You can also do Control C and Control V for that. And now I'm going to basically rename that folder to CZ-CSS1. So I'm going to right click, choose rename, type in CZ-CSS1. Okay, so now we have a copy of that folder. It's renamed to reflect that we're doing CSS lesson 1, and we're going to be doing quite a few lessons, so let's go ahead and create a new folder on our desktop. So I'm going to right click and choose new, choose folder, and now I'm going to right click on that new folder, choose rename, and I'm going to call it CSS, or rather I'm going to call it CZ-CSS. So now I have a folder on my desktop called CZ-CSS. I'm going to take the CZ-CSS1 folder and I'm going to right click on it, choose copy. I'm going to double click on the CZ.CSS folder, double click on it. Now I'm going to right click in that folder and choose paste. And there we go. So now we have a main folder for our CSS lessons, and we're going to have lesson 1 subfolder inside of it. So this is going to be a long lesson for lesson 1. We're usually going to try to keep it around 5 minutes, but because we're setting this up for the first time, it's going to take a little bit longer today. But in the future, it'll be just copy your template folder and rename it and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and go inside of the CSS1 folder and right click on our index.html file. I use Notepad++. If you haven't installed it, I'll put a link in the description below on how to install it. You can also use Notepad, but I'm going to choose edit with Notepad++. I now have my index.html file open, and in the first video, if you haven't gone through the first video in this series, we talked about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we set up this template folder. You should have already gone through that. So I open up the index.html file. I've got my template there. I've got my HTML element, my head, my body, and I have a link to a style sheet. And that's what we're going to be working with. We're going to be working with that style sheet. Let's first start by adding, going to the body and adding the HTML element h1. So I'm going to go to the body, tag the first one, put my cursor on the right side, press enter. I'm going to tab out by pressing the tab button. I'm going to type in less than h1 greater than. I'm going to type my name SHANE, then I'm going to type in less than / h1 and type a greater than sign and save it. So now I'm going to click on the save icon. So I have my h1 element, and inside of that element I have my name. So I'm going to go back to my folder, I'm going to right click on it, choose open with Google Chrome or whatever browser you're using. And there we go. We have my browser open and I can see my name in big bold letters. So that's my h1 tag. Now let's say we didn't want that h1 tag to look that way. So h1 stands for heading. It's really about describing your data. H1, it's your heading, your main heading, your first heading. but let's say we wanted to change it and we don't want the default settings. So that's what CSS is all about. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back to my Notepad++, and the first way you can do styles is you can go to the H1 tag, and this is called an inline style. I usually do this when I'm just trying something out. It's not something I would recommend to do in bigger projects long term. Usually you want to put all of your styles into the style sheet, that way they can be reused, and that'll be the last way I go over with you today on how to do styles. But this way is called inline styles. It's great if you want to try something out real quick. So I'm going to type in space, and I'm going to add attribute to my H1 element, style equals, double quote, I'm going to put color, COLOR, colon, RED, semicolon, in double quote. So I just added the style attribute. Now the style attribute is allowing me to put a CSS property on the H1 tag. So this is called an inline style. So this property has a property name, which is color. So all CSS properties are defined this way. You have a name, or a property name, color. In this case, you have a colon, and then your value for that property. In my case, I put red, and then you end it with a semicolon. So that's very important. Each CSS property, that's the syntax for creating a property. Property name, colon, property value, end it with semicolon. So I'm going to click on the icon to save, go back to my browser, and I'm going to click refresh, and there we go. Now my style has changed on the H1 element on my heading. My heading is now red. So that's called inline style. Let's jump to the second way you can create styles. Go back to my document. I'm going to go ahead and delete that attribute that I added, and I'm going to go back to the top here, and in the top I'm going to my head element. Let's go to the end of that link line. I'm going to press enter, add a line underneath there, and I'm going to add a section called style. So less than STYLE, greater than sign, press enter, less than less than STYLE, greater than sign. I'm going to hit my up arrow key, press enter to go to the middle of that element, tab out, and now I'm going to add what's called an element selector. And we'll go in depth later on in one of the next videos on the different types of selectors. In this case, I'm going to add an element selector. I'm going to try to find all the H1 tags. So I'm going to say H1 space, the squiggly bracket, which is shift bracket, and I'm going to end that squiggly bracket, shift in closing bracket, go to the middle of the bracket, and I'm going to type in that same property, color, COLOR, colon, RED, semicolon. So this is a style block. It's in my heading. So instead of putting it in your H1 tag, you can put it in your heading, and then that CSS selector can be reused multiple times in your document without having to copy it more than once. Right? You only have it one time versus having inline to several elements. Click save, go to my browser, and click refresh, and it should stay red. It did. Awesome. So that's working. It found the H1 tag and it colored it red. It's no longer black like it used to be in the first when we first opened up the document. So let's go over the third and final way of adding styles to your CSS page. Go ahead and go back to index.html. I'm going to take that whole style block, and I'm going to use my left mouse button and highlight it. I'm going to right click, choose cut, and now I'm going to go to my folder. I'll go to my CSS subfolder. I'm going to right click on that style.css file we created in the first introduction video, and I'm going to choose edit with Notepad++ or Notepad. And now I have that, and now I have that style.css open. I'm going to right click, choose paste, and now I have the style pasted into that document. So since this is a style.css file, you don't actually have to put a style section. So let's remove the style element. So I'm going to get rid of the begin tag, get rid of the end tag, and I'm going to delete some spaces behind that H1 so that it's tabbed out correctly. In this case, it shouldn't be tabbed out. So now I have a file called style.css. I've got an H1 CSS element selector. It has the property defined for color, colon, red, semicolon. I want to change it to blue this time, BLUE. And now I'm going to click save. I'm going to go back to my index.html file. Now, because we linked that style sheet, this document, the browser is going to pull that property in. It's going to pull that style sheet in because it's linked to the index.html. So I've clicked saved. I'm going to go back to my folder. I'm going to right click on index.html and I'm going to choose open with Google Chrome. Boom. There we go. So now my H1 heading is colored blue and I have an CSS style sheet attached to my HTML page. So with the style section, you can reuse styles inside your document. With inline styles, you can't reuse them. You have to write them over and over and over again for each element that you want to style. What if you want to share styles across pages? And you usually do. And that's why it's the preferred method. Then you would use style sheets. So I can attach that style sheet to multiple HTML pages and reuse those styles across all my web pages. So that's the preferred method. That's the beauty of it. You can reuse. You don't want to have duplicate code. That's more to maintain later, and it can get pretty hairy. So you want to be sure to use that way of creating styles. Now, as we learn, there are definitely easier ways for you to practice these styles. There are programs on the web you can use where you just type it in. You don't have to create these files, all that good stuff. I'm purposely choosing for us to create these files so you understand how these files work together. If you want to learn using those editors on the web, feel free to do that, but I just wanted you to understand how to create these files and work with files. That's why we're going this route. So that's it for our lesson today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Of course, it's a little bit more than 5 minutes, and this is our first video. We're going to try to keep the videos down 5-10 minutes. And keep them nice and small and go over 1 or 2 features each time. So hope you liked the lesson. If you did, click the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. If you disliked it, go ahead and hit the dislike button. But let me know. Send me a comment. Let me know how I can improve it and make it better for you. So thanks for joining us. See you next time.